Okay, hello. Welcome to the final Barriger seminar of 2021, our November seminar. I'm Nick Fry. I'm the curator of the John W. Barriger III National Railroad Library, and currently this is going to be the first one we've done with a live presenter in-house in the library. That's where we're operating from this morning or this afternoon. We have presenters here and we have presenters at their homes, and we hope this is going to be a good day for everyone and enjoy it. Our first presenter is David Jump. Dave is the principal behind American Milling here in St. Louis, and if you've been following the grain shipping situation here in St. Louis, American Milling's been a significant part of the infrastructure behind it and the development of St. Louis's shipping capabilities. And Dave is also a serving board member on the Herman T. Pott Inland Waterways Board and has served on the St. Louis Mercantile Library Board. So he's been a big supporter of the work we do here in St. Louis at the Mercantile Library. And I think he's got an interesting presentation. I certainly enjoyed it when we saw the practice today, and I had some very interesting questions, I thought, that were brought up by this discussion. So without much further ado, we're going to hand it over to Dave. One thing I do want to let everyone know, some folks, this may be your first seminar. We do ask everyone to use the chat function in Teams to ask questions. It keeps people from talking over everyone. We will also probably mute most microphones just to make sure that we don't have any audio bleed over. And we also are going to be recording all of the presentations today. We will be putting them online via the Mercantile Library's YouTube channel. And traditionally, I will send everyone who attended or registered a link to the YouTube videos when we're done. And we also put the links up on our Facebook and other social media pages. So I'm going to hand it off now to Dave and mute my microphone so I can sit back here and enjoy. And I will also be relaying questions to Dave throughout his presentation. So Dave, jump, everyone.
Okay. All right. So this is kind of a first for me too. And I don't speak before groups often. Generally, it's grade school children, high school students, or college students, but always they're actually in the room. So the way this normally goes is whatever the subject is, I've usually got not that much prepared, maybe 10, 15 minutes or something, and then I let the questions kind of direct where the conversation goes, because that way people are hearing about the things that they seem to be showing interest in hearing about. So I think Nick's got some questions that he hasn't told me about yet, but all of you, please engage, and it will make this easier for me and hopefully more interesting for you, because I'm not getting an opportunity to read the faces to see kind of what I'm talking about that does you some good and what doesn't. So, so I've been asked to talk about the river system and how it works in the grain business. And so with that in mind, so this is a river system. And I don't know how well you could see it there, but basically, so we've got Minneapolis, we're coming down the upper Mississippi River, here's St. Louis here, we get to Cairo, we go down into the lower Mississippi River, here is New Orleans, here's Cairo, St. Louis, and then I'm gonna pick some rate points here to talk about, which are Peoria, Hennepin, Davenport, and well, I'll probably go all the way to Minneapolis. So the way this works is you've got these different rate points, so that maybe I'll just draw this so it's a little easier. So you imagine this is sort of the western belly of Illinois that sticks out like this, and Cairo and the Ohio River going up that way, and the Mississippi River going down that way. So we've got New Orleans down here. We've got Cairo here. We've got St. Louis here. We've got Hennepin here. We've got Peoria here. We got Davenport here, and up there somewhere we've got Minneapolis. So all of these spots and many more, every spot on the whole river system has got, let me just, we're not going to do anything on the Missouri, but just for reference, there's Missouri. They've all got rate points. So for instance, Cairo is 3.80. St. Louis is 3.99. Am I blocking that? You can see it, okay. Peoria is going to be 4.81. Hennepin 5.07. That'll do as much over there. Davenport is 5.32. I'll explain what all these mean in just a second. Minneapolis is 6.19. So these have to do with the cost of shipping on a per ton basis, loaded barges to New Orleans from each of these points. And so it makes sense that the further down the river system you get, the shorter the distance to New Orleans, the cheaper the rate structure. That's the easy part. Were you asking a question?
Yes. Is that dollars per ton?
That's dollars per ton.
Okay.
Sort of.
Okay.
So then what happens is the way freight trades. So let's say that we'll just start with St. Louis, because that's the biggest market of the bunch. Is freight might be bid at 250% and offered at maybe 260%. So, and it used to trade years ago at 100%. So these really were the rates. But in today's marketplace, we don't get to 100% anymore. So when the rate to ship from, when the market is 200%, that just means that it's 3.99 times 2. So we're at actually at $7.98 per ton on that day if it's trading at 200%. If it's trading to 300%, 400%, 500%, you just multiply by each of these. So the same is true here in Peoria, or let's say Hennepin. If Hennepin's at 300%, it's times 3. I actually wrote some of these down. So Hennepin at 300% is $15.21. You know, we're not using this. I'm going to use this. So it's $15.21. The people that are in the grain business, they don't use the per ton. They think in terms of bushels because that's the way grain trades. So if you're at $15.21 in Hennepin, Illinois, yesterday on Friday, $15.21. Yeah, I actually did my homework here. Is 42.6 cents per bushel. So, so that's the way the setup works. So there's just grain everywhere. There's lots of grain out here. Grain this way. Grain, when you start to get too far east, generally doesn't go to the river. It more generally goes to the southeast. But the bulk of the Corn Belt works very well to the river system by truck or rail. Yes.
Now, these numbers are mainly for corn and soy and not wheat. Is that correct?
The same numbers would work for wheat. Wheat's just not in the same place. The wheat that's getting exported is kind of out in there, Oklahoma, northern Texas, Kansas, and is more of a, Houston is more of the port for wheat. And I know you like railroads. That's moving by rail.
Okay.
So that's how that's BNSF, Union Pacific,
KCS.
Yeah. Oh, that's not a river market.
Okay.
But yes, this is corn and soybeans, and the rates are all the same. Now this is actually a corn number, And I don't know how much detail you want here, but basically the weight of a bushel of soybeans is 60 pounds for calculation purposes. For corn, it's 56 pounds. So when you convert back to tons like this calculation is based off of 35.71 bushels per ton. Okay. So if I did my numbers right, that times that is $15.21. Okay. So are you the only one asking questions so far?
So far.
Okay.
I have to let everybody know.
I meant it on that question. I meant it on that question. The grade school kids are always asking questions about it. All right, so so then how does this actually trade? So what happens is you've got a group of people in a room at places like Cargill and Bunge and maybe American Milling, but at the grain companies. Oh, did I go too far? Okay. At the grain companies, they've got this exercise that they're doing all day long. Consolidated grain barge, people that are exporting grain. So at any moment, they know what grain's worth in the New Orleans market. So we'll just pick a number and let's say that's $5 per bushel. It's $5 per bushel. Okay, well then somebody is buying barge freight in that room. Somebody's job is to know what's the Gulf worth. Somebody's job is to know, and maybe the same somebody, what is this barge freight worth? So they'll say, let's say they're thinking about St. Louis. So they're in St. Louis and they say, well, barge freight today is worth 300%. So 300% is going to be 33.5 cents. $33.5 a bushel. So, so somebody in this office is on the phone with a train shipper out here somewhere. They're talking with people that are going to ship to them by truck. And in the St. Louis area, that truck dry area kind of looks like that sort of. And so they're having conversations, and they're telling them what they're willing to pay for grain delivered to St. Louis in this case. Now, somebody in Peoria is doing the same exercise, Hennepin, same exercise. Each of these places, same exercise. He knows he's 33.5 cents off of this. He backs that off from $5. And then he figures he's got certain costs to handle. So he adds, maybe another minus another nickel, and he gives them a bid. Now, I'm leaving out the Chicago Board of Trade part for the moment. We can come back to that, but this number isn't really $5 a bushel. It's moving around a lot every day, moving up multiple cents, down multiple cents, and that's where the hedging part of this gets in. But in the just in the basics, that's happening in St. Louis. That's happening in each of these points. You can find people sitting in just obscure small elevators. They're all doing this exercise exactly the same way, back to the point that matters to them. Now, as a general statement, the corn is kind of, I'm running out of colors here. The corn is in the corn belt, so the corn is up in here, that's coming to the river. So same's true for the beans. So the beans will work a little further south too, and it's all coming into this funnel. Now there's a lot of domestic consumption. In fact, there's a lot more domestic consumption than there is export consumption. But the domestic consumption is where it is, and they've got to pay what they've got to pay. But in the case of export, they're all working off of the same method and the same basing point down here at the bottom.
So are there also comparable to these people in these elevators? Are there people in say Omaha, Fort Worth, and Kansas City, also looking at being flexible with the rates they provide as a rail shipper? Or because of the way rail rates are structured, do they not have the flexibility? Is this much more oriented to the barge and the truck shipper than the rail shipper?
Well, what I'm talking about is barge rates, and you have every day, all day long, buyers and sellers of barge freight, meaning users are generally the buyers, and barge lines and barge management companies are the sellers. And there's I'm going to say there's not really the same ongoing price discovery that takes place when you're talking about rail freight. Now,
does that tend to be like a long-term contract that you've already locked in with the railroad before the season started?
Well,
I mean, I'm asking out of ignorance.
I know you're asking. I know part of why you're asking is because you're a rail guy.
Yes.
So I'm kind of more of a barge guy.
Okay.
So I don't want to mislead you. The answer in a general way is you've got the Pacific Northwest market out here. You've got a lot of grain in this area here. The grain, and then I'm going to get to your question. Okay. The grain in this area here, as when barge freight is relatively low, and these numbers are 200 and 300%, though sometimes they get up to 500 and 600%. But when rates are pretty economical here, this grain is coming this way. When these river rates go up, the grain has the same grain has a tendency to go this way. So these elevators, and this is not Fort Worth and some of those other places. This is more like Iowa and eastern Nebraska. They can go pretty easily either way with rail shipments of these larger train sets that we're shipping now. Now, sometimes those cars are private cars, and that's one rate. Sometimes those cars are railroad cars. That's a different rate. And there's published rates, and the discussions that they're having with the Class 1 railroads that are moving this, I'm not in the room for those discussions. So I'm not trying to dodge your question.
No, okay.
I'm not that guy.
Okay, fair enough.
I feel the effects of those discussions, but I'm not the guy that's really in the middle of those discussions.
Okay.
Okay. So there's a lot of well, while we're on the subject of going to the Pacific Northwest or coming to the river, the other big factor that matters is ocean freight. So imagine you're going to the Pacific Rim with a lot of this grain. That's not exclusively true, but a lot of the economics are driven by that. And there's a rate, an ocean rate from New Orleans to Pacific Rim destinations. And there's an ocean freight rate, which is always cheaper from the Pacific Northwest, Seattle, Tacoma, those ports up there, to those same destinations. And barge freight's pretty cheap. I mean, to be able to ship something 1,000 miles for $10 a ton that's a pretty good deal. While shipping by rail, that's not a bad deal, but that's just it all adds up. And so there is this balance that goes on between the Gulf and the Pacific Northwest, and where you see the effects of it are in this area out here, where they're either shipping to the west or they're shipping to the east. So this really is sort of Econ 101. This actually works like freshman level economics. If the ocean freight off of the Gulf is that spread versus, I mean, off the Pacific Northwest versus the Gulf is really relatively advantageous, this market is not going to receive as much grain. These barge freight rates are going to go down, not the fixed numbers, but you're going to drop from 300 to 275 to 250 and try to buy back that grain to get those loads. So everything is constantly sort of resetting itself. It's one of those examples where capitalism actually creates very, very efficient results. And nobody is in a position where they can force things. So there's nobody can just hold their rates high and say, tough luck, that's what you got to pay, because nobody needs them. Right? Okay. So, all right. So that's that part. The grain buying I talked about a little bit. Nick, some of the questions you asked me before were about kind of the evolution of the rail traffic,
Yeah.
and where it goes in the grain business and why. And again, I'm going to leave wheat out of this for a moment, but I've been at this long enough that we used to move stuff on single car rates, and then 3-car rates, and then 15-car rates, 25-car rates. Then we got all the way up to 75 cars. And now what's being done is train sets that are something like 110 plus. Usually don't see them much bigger than 125 cars. And a lot of the grain that's moving now to the river is moving in these much larger units. And the railroads, they know their own efficiencies, and this seems to be to work for them. And if you've got facilities that can load this in a matter of hours, and facilities that can unload units this size in a matter of hours, these train sets can cycle pretty fast. And this seems to be kind of it's like we finally got there. You know, in the grain business, I didn't see a lot of grain moving years ago like this. The 75-car units, that felt like it was really starting to make a difference. These bigger units here for corn and soybeans are, it just seems like if you're not set up for that, you're just not the one getting the primary business. Yes.
So if you've got a train of 110 plus cars and it gets to a destination, the railroad's going to want those cars back in service as quickly as possible. So they're not going to.
And the locomotives stay. They stay with them.
So they want to cycle that back into service as quickly as possible. So can you do that kind of work just anywhere on the river? Because I would assume 110, 120. If you've got multiple trains like this coming in a day, you've got to have significant elevators to handle it and silos to handle it. But then you got to have enough barges on hand to keep the system fluid. So one thing here, you know, as you go further north, I noticed that there are plenty of locks on the Mississippi, and that limits the tow size. If there a spot that's the sweet spot for this kind of work, this rail barge interface. And yes, this is a leading question based on our practice.
Yeah, well, so I think there is. Mm-hmm. So let me. You also seem to be interested in the history of what used to be sweet spots and how those sweet spots change over time. So if you don't mind, I'll answer it that way.
Yeah.
We're good on time, right?
Oh, plenty.
All right. So there's locks. Well, now I've thrown the other thing away, but when you get above St. Louis, you've got locks on the Illinois River, and when you get past Hennepin, you really got kind of locks. When you get above St. Louis on the upper Mississippi River, you've got at Alton here, well, actually at Granite City, you've got lock 27. Now, they're not all exactly numbered right, some are out of service, but 27 locks. So that means you've got 27 pools, or 25, or whatever it is today. And it's not that easy. Well, it's not easy. It's not difficult, but it takes a while to get through a lock and dam. And these locks up here and these locks up here, a 15 barge tow is what moves on these locking rivers. Same thing's true on the Ohio up here. And you have to break the tow, except at the lowest locks. You have to break the tow into 2 pieces. It'll only take 3 barge lengths at a time. You got the first 3 barges up, in, out, back, get the barge length boat, go through all of this, and you're only taking 15 barges. So the boat is sized for that, but this is not a cheap thing to do. This is. It's not cheap, but boy, it's efficient. St. Louis to New Orleans, and Cairo to New Orleans, that's kind of the superhighway. So you can make a couple 100 miles a day doing that. While here, it's a function of who are you waiting on and what maintenance is going on and just the sheer time it takes to get through there. So, and you've generally got more water depth once you get St. Louis and south, because you've been joined by the Missouri River here. So there were changes that evolved in river transportation, just like there were in what the railroads wanted to do. This is something that over the years, when you talk with the railroads, they say, we want to move grain like coal. And your railroad guys will know what I mean. That coal for a long time has moved in large train sets, same cars, same locomotives, cycling as fast as possible. I don't mean speed. I mean, yeah, you know, days of cycle. And so that's the way that's very similar to the way this grain now moves. Well, in the river business, something that some really bright people did, mostly in the early 90s, was they started building barges that were 2 feet taller, which meant 2 feet deeper. So everything looks the same up top, but you can get an extra something like 400 plus tons in that barge. But that barge should operate from St. Louis south, because much of the time you don't have enough water depth in these locking rivers to be able to load that barge as deep as you need to get that extra benefit. So another thing that's happened is just generally there's not as much corn going export up in these areas, and that's because of ethanol. I'm not saying ethanol is a bad thing. It's just part of the evolution of all of this. So more and more, a larger and larger percentage of the grain that's going to export on the river is coming to St. Louis over the last 20 years, has continued increasing. Yes.
I have a question from the audience. Barbara is asking, is grain from train cars emptied into barges? I think they're asking if it's directly into barges. If so, how's it unloaded at the destination site? So I think is that coming up?
I'll get you in a second, Barbara.
Okay.
We're not going to forget that. So, so you ask about the sweet spot, and I'm just about there. So the sweet spot is, yes, St. Louis is the spot where a lot of this grain that used to come from up in here and even out here to the upper Mississippi comes to St. Louis. The rate that we have a facility in Pekin, which is the Peoria area, and the spread, the cost to ship from Pekin to New Orleans versus St. Louis to New Orleans 20 years ago was a difference of a couple dollars a ton. And now that difference is significantly more in most years than a couple dollars a ton. And much of that is because the St. Louis just works better. It's the bigger barges. You're now talking about, when you ship from St. Louis south, it's not 15 barges in that tow. It's 30, sometimes 35 barges, depending upon the boat, river conditions. And you just get a lot more efficiency. And the barge lines want to do it. And the way, again, it's Econ 100, the way the barge lines help induce this to happen is they charge rates that are commensurate with them doing what works for them. So the answer to the sweet spot question, I think, is today St. Louis. And I'm not talking about the whole grain market, but St. Louis is the spot where these very large trains come. It's a spot where the interstates for the trucks really converge at St. Louis, and because of the bridges, you can pull from both sides of the river. And it's a place that the barge lines are able to ship with these big barges and big boats, and that they're the most efficient. So we have watched the percentage of grain barges that arrive in New Orleans that come from St. Louis over the last years, 20 years at least, have continued to increase. And a lot of capacity has been added in the St. Louis market for the loading of those barges. And yes, part of your question, Nick, was where can you get that many barges? St. Louis. You can get a lot of barges in places where the boats turn. And these big boats that are coming up to St. Louis, they don't go any further, because that's where you start to hit locks. And so that's where they drop their tows. And those barges are either going to get now put into other tows to go up the river, or they're going to load in St. Louis. The same thing happens in Cairo. There's just a lot more grain in St. Louis. So Barbara wants to know, how does it actually, how do you physically do this?
Yes.
Okay, so
and I have a question from Frank later on about grain ownership while it's in transit.
okay.
But we'll take care of.
Well, we're not gonna. Barbara got there first.
Right, Barbara's first, and then we'll go with Frank's question.
So let me. So this is what a covered hopper car looks like. Am I blocking the camera? And then it's got a lid up here, and these are hoppers, and it's got wheels over here. And this is actually the first grade version, but Barbara may be a first grader, I don't know. So and then you've got a coupler out here and a coupler out here, and you hook a whole bunch of those together. So these operate like funnels, and they've got gates on them. So those gates are closed, and this is a covered hopper car. So Barbara, you can Google a covered hopper car, and they're trough loaded. So you've got the spout on the top, and you move the car underneath it, and load, and then you go to the next one, the next one, the next one. When you get to the barge loading facility, what you've generally got is here's your rail track. Somewhere in there, there's a pit with a conveyor that comes out the end, and that conveyor goes up out of the ground and out to the river, and there sits a barge to load, and another empty waiting to be loaded, and then there's a spout. So the side view of that sort of looks in my block.
You're okay.
All right. So you've got a barge sitting in the river like this with hatch openings. And you've got a tower that's driven down into the bottom of the river, and here's our water level here. And as that conveyor comes up and over the top, you've got an operator that sits kind of right here, and he can control this spout that it's telescopic. It swings up and down, and it rotates around, and he can put that grain wherever he needs to in this barge, and then the barge moves down. You keep moving the barge down as you load it, and as you load the barge, you go into one end, and it goes down like this. You keep moving, comes down like that, and this back end usually comes up 18 to 24 inches as you load it. It's done. It moves down. You swing your spout around and start right away in the next barge.
So when you get to New Orleans, what's the unloading process? Is there a conveyor that goes into the barge?
Okay. At most facilities, they use a marine leg, but there's really kind of two ways to do it. So the other way is with a clamshell bucket. Okay. So this is a crane, that rotates like this, and it's got a big, enormous bucket that drops into the grain, pulls together, lifts up, swings back into a hopper, and you just go, go, go like that. And this is really a big crane. The other way to do it is with a marine leg. I'll get rid of this. Good thing I got rid of that whole
Yeah, you do the real
yeah, yeah. So so the way a marine leg works is you've got a pulley, top and bottom, and then you've got a belt that goes around like that, and it's got buckets on it. And these buckets are shaped, the profile of them kind of looks like that. And another one, and then you get up to the top. And as they go around the top of the leg has got a shape like that. And the grain is thrown out down that spout. The empty buckets go back down again, and they pick them up, pick them up, pick them up. And here's your barge. So these covers, that cover is lifted off. It's a fiberglass cover normally, and you can lift it off, set it aside, and then you've got this big marine leg, and it's down in there, and you can move it up and down, and you move the barge down as it's digging, scooping, scooping, and then at some point you put somebody in there with a bobcat or a front end loader that is then shoving to the end, and at the very end, that operator is just dumping it into the bucket, and you're out of there and go on to the next one.
Okay.
Who's my next?
Your next one is Frank Dewey, who has a question about this ownership of the grain change while it's on the barges moving down the rivers.
Okay. It can. I mean, basically what happens is whatever a buyer and seller agree to. So if, well, so the simplest version is take a grain company like Cargill. Cargill, which is a great company, by the way. I mean, they're all great companies, but Cargill or ADM or somebody that's that's very vertically integrated is buying it at the grain elevator out here in Pocahontas, Iowa, and loading it into cars. So they own it. As soon as it's received at their elevator, they pay for it, they own it, they load it into rail cars, they ship it to Peoria, they still own it, it goes through an ADM facility in this case, loads into barges, and goes down to an ADM facility in New Orleans. So this is pretty much ADM all the way. They may even have a vessel charter that takes it to the other side of the world, and it's ADM all the way until it's unloaded. That's the simplest version. In the trade, when multiple parties get involved with respect to the river, what generally happens is you load that barge. As soon as you load that, and as you're loading that barge, there is a federally licensed grain inspector that is on site. That inspector is taking samples throughout the loading of the barge, as many samples as they want, as often as they want. And then they give you a grade certificate on that barge. You also have a weight on the barge. It's not always perfect, but you can settle that up later. And it's possible and very common to load a barge. And when you have the grade certificate and you've got the weight and you've got a bill of lading from the barge line, to sell that barge and be paid for it. And that's a very common thing to do. Those documents hit the bank of the customer that's buying that barge load of grain, and it's paid for by wire transfer, normally the next business day, if you get all the documents to them by a certain cutoff. And at that point, that grain is owned by the buyer until he sells it to the next person. Now, you can load barges and not sell them. You can load barges, and if you choose, you can wait until they hit the Baton Rouge and say, hey, I've got 4 afloat barges in this tow. And that's something that you might do if you believe that there is such an appetite in the nearby spot market that someone will pay a premium for a barge that they need to make a ship. That's a level of speculation that where I work, we really don't get into that. But yes, you can do it that way.
I can see where you could get stuck out on a limb like that if all of a sudden you get to New Orleans and it's like, we're good right now. And
well, they're never good. It's just you may not. Yeah, you can get beat up, but it's just going to be a few cents, a bushel or something. To a degree, the New Orleans market for grain is a black hole. It's a function of price, but it doesn't really happen that we're sending barges down to New Orleans, and what if they don't need them?
they're never full.
Sometimes it gets backed up, and again, this is the whole price discovery thing, where if that market gets cheap enough, then buyers are moving off the Pacific Northwest, and it's not just the Pacific Rim that they're shipping to; they're shipping to all different parts of the world. But again, the most common thing, at least in the part of the market that we're in, is not to bet that the price is going to be higher or lower. It's not to bet, it's to lock in a margin. So day after day after day, you're what's the barge freight? What's the Gulf worth? What's it cost to get there? How much of a margin can I make to cover the cost of answering Barbara's question about the loading of the barges and any risk that you might have, and paying your employees and all these sorts of things. That's more the business that I'm familiar with.
And Barbara says, thank you. That explains the conveyor belt she sees along the river.
Do we know where Barbara is?
I
I can tell her where to see conveyors.
I'm in St. Louis.
She's in St. Louis.
Great. All right. Barbara. So when you are on Interstate 55 and you are south of the Anheuser-Busch Brewery, as you look over into Illinois, you will see lots and lots of conveyor belts. That's where this happens that I'm talking about. That's where the large trains happen. They happen at other places in St. Louis, but in terms of a concentrated area, there's about 2 miles there, again, on the Illinois side. Or if you don't, maybe you shouldn't be looking out the window while you're going up the interstate, but you can go to Google Earth or something. But that's the area of concentration where this happens in a big way. And truthfully, if you want to just go over there and drive around, there's so much activity, nobody will know enough to kick you out of there. So just make yourself know.
Thank you.
But please respect private property.
Yeah, but I mean, any place that's got 2,000 truck drivers a day coming, you'll be fine.
Okay. Okay, does anyone else have any more questions for Dave? We're about 45 minutes in, the first hour or so.
Let me give you a little teaser.
Okay.
All right. A complication that I didn't get into before, I didn't know if we'd have enough time for, is the grain futures element. So when I said this doesn't really just sit there at $5, what happens is at the Chicago Board of Trade, which is now part of the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, you've got delivery months in corn and in soybeans, and then you've got, so this conversation that I described is all happening like it's, well, what are you doing today for grain to ship today? That's not actually what happens. What happens is somebody calls any one of these places and they want to sell grain, and they say, well, I'm bidding $4.62. This is an example. If it comes in today, oh, well, what do you pay for next month? Oh, next month. Well, next month I'm willing to pay $4.67. Oh, okay. Well, that's nice to know. What are you doing for January? Well, for January, I am $4.78. And that's always the way it is. is that the not necessarily what's almost always worth more and more and more, or all the grain comes immediately. And that's called an inverse, but this is called a carry. And to have a carry in the market is why it makes sense to have grain bins. This stuff is grown once a year. And if it wasn't worth more in the future than what it's worth today, all this grain would come to the market as fast as it possibly could. Doing that would drive down, and does drive down, the nearby market. Now, the opposite of a carry is an inverse. It happens, but inverses are not the general rule. So, so this is determined by the Chicago Board of Trade futures market, and the cash market has got what's called a basis. So that if futures are $5.10 and St. Louis is 20 under, that means, well, what it's under is barge freight. The barge freight differential minus their handling margin is what the differential is below New Orleans. But in Chicago, if you're $5.10 a bushel, and well, we're at 20 under today, you could be at 20 under all day, while this number bounced around up 2 cents, 5 cents, down 3 cents, and still tell somebody we're at 2 cents, 3 cents under. So I'm not sure I did anything but confuse anybody with that, but let's just go with this carry. So there's a carry. So when I say corn's worth in this example $5 a bushel here, yeah, but it's worth $5.10 next month, and it's worth $5.20 3 months from now, and it's worth $5.40. So people are not just making decisions about where's the best place for me to go, but they're also making decisions about when's the best time to ship it. And that's how the grain market sort of spreads itself out, so that the demand is not 3 months a year. Even though the production all comes out in 6-8 weeks of the year, the demand is year long. And so the supply matches that. But it only matches it because there's this carry in the market in most years. And if the grain market says, ooh, I need, like you said, I got 10 ships that are going to be loading in the next 12 days down here, and I need to go get it. This number goes up, 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 and you might even have an inverse. You might call the guy that you've got grain bought from for next month to say, hey, could you bring it in now? I'll pay you that price plus a couple cents. And that's the way a lot of the supply and demand gets really leveled out, is through these forward pricing mechanisms.
And I would also guess then, as the harvest season so you got everything in storage that's gradually being drawn down throughout the course of a year. As the next harvest is bearing down on us, prices start falling because they want to empty out the silos, so they're not just going to let that corn and soybeans rot in the fields, or is it sometimes worth not putting it into the market?
You would make a really good trainee in this business, Nick. Those are good questions. That is a delicate moment every year. Sometimes the crop that's coming on isn't that big.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's an issue. Sometimes the demand for ethanol is very strong. The demand for feed is very, very strong, and there's not that much left for export. And sometimes there's a quality issue. You may want to hang on to some of that really, really good stuff because you're concerned about the quality that's going to be coming out of the field. But yeah, in the grade school version of this, what you're saying is correct. Carry, new crop, carry, new crop. There's a logic to that. But on a year-to-year basis, what actually happens is many times messier than that.
Your results may vary.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay. Does anyone have any more questions? Oh, here we go. Frank has another question. Does New Orleans typically ship grain to South America while Baltimore ships to Europe and LA or the Pacific Northwest ships to China? Or are they all these ports around the country competing with each other for similar destinations? So like, are the East Coast ports competing with the Gulf and the West Coast and vice versa?
Yeah, so the Pacific Northwest ships to the Pacific Rim, and as far as I know, no place else. The idea of going backwards through the Panama Canal, that's not going to happen. Shipping to South America is unusual because Argentina and Brazil now are major producers of corn and soybeans. The largest exporter in the world, I think, this year of soybeans is not the United States, it's Brazil. So to ship to South America, that would be pretty uncommon. But yes, to the Atlantic, which must be over here somewhere, to the Atlantic, that's going to be hit out of the Gulf. Many years ago, some of that would come out of the Great Lakes. That's pretty uncommon. For grain to ship off of there you are, Frank. For grain to ship off of the East Coast is not unheard of, but it's uncommon. Grain, in a general way, and any grain trader knows this isn't totally true, grain's worth more as you go east. The further east you go, the higher the cost is. And when you get out of the Corn Belt, that really happens. So you can find a cornfield in Pennsylvania, but it's for dairy cattle, it's for chickens in the Delmarva Peninsula. It's not for export. Right. So the idea of coming from the Midwest to export is off the East Coast is extremely uncommon. The other thing, I know you've got a railroad crowd out there.
And Frank is a railroad guy. He's he's a retired CSX vice president. So.
All right. Well, really, all right. Well, Frank, I mean, you got UP and BNSF, and you got CSX and Norfolk Southern, and so do you really think this grain out here in the UP and the BNSF is going to make it break over Chicago or break over St. Louis and get on out to the East Coast? I don't think so. I don't see that very often. So you're talking about Eastern grain that's going to need to get there, and you've got so many chickens and hogs and dairy in the Carolinas and in the upstate New York and Pennsylvania area that to break through that from a value standpoint for grain to wind up on the East Coast, it's not that much more expensive to ship the ocean freight to ship from New Orleans to the Mediterranean than it is to ship from Baltimore.
So part of this, Frank and I both have experience with what Baltimore's grain shipping infrastructure used to be in Maryland. And in fact, my brother used to live in a reconditioned silo complex that was a railroad-owned grain silo in Baltimore, massive. That market is essentially all gone. Anything that's going out now is going out of New Orleans. That's pretty much what you're saying here.
That would be an epic change at this point for that to go the other way.
Yeah.
You just got you got a lot of people over here on the right coast and the left coast, but these East Coast consumptive demand is really drives a market for animal protein, chickens, hogs, and dairy cattle in different parts that the Eastern Corn Belt, which doesn't produce anywhere near as much as Illinois, Iowa, Eastern Nebraska, that Eastern Corn Belt sometimes goes export, but and it does, when it happens, it goes out New Orleans. But to actually move east, it's to hit those livestock feeding operations.
Never makes it to the coastline before it's consumed.
Never's a long time, but
it tends to.
It's something strange in the neighborhood when that's going on.
Okay. Anybody have any more questions? We're about at an hour for Dave.
I didn't think there would be that much interest.
Hey.
Maybe there wasn't. Maybe it's just me talking.
It's a hip crowd. Okay.
Well, hello to my grandkids, my mom. I know you're up.
All right. Well, Dave, thank you so much for giving us part of your Saturday today to join us. And Barbara says thank you. If you do have questions, we do have.
I'll see you in Cahokia sometime, Barbara.
If you do have questions that you think of later on, you can contact me at the library and I can pass them on to Dave. Or Sarah Hodge is here, who's been helping out with the presentation. She's our waterways curator. Either one of us can help you out with either looking up the answer here at our fine waterways and railroad libraries, or getting in contact with Dave. You know, our rule of thumb here is if we don't know the answer, we know who to ask or where to look it up. So,
I should have used the stick.
oh yeah,
Maybe next time.
next time. All right, let me switch over here. We're gonna go back to my camera and. Okay. All right,